Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Trudy Murata, volunteer community ambassador with AARP here in Northern Virginia. From our earliest beginnings, AARP has championed lifelong learning, and that's why AARP is thrilled to bring you our Tuesday Explorer program every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time from now until, I think, April, if I remember correctly. For more than 60 years, AARP has been a wise friend and a fierce defender, helping individuals to ensure that their money, health, and happiness live as long as they do. AARP has earned a reputation as a wise friend and fierce defender through trusted information, tools, and advocacy designed to protect the health and financial security of older Americans and empower them to choose how they live as they age. By promising to be this wise friend and fierce defender, AARP is helping people who are 50 plus and their families feel confident, in control, and secure as they age. And this means AARP helps you protect yourself and your loved ones from frauds and scams through our Fraud Watch network, get healthy and stay healthy, care for loved ones, make connections, plan a trip, learn new technologies, attend a class, and have fun, just like what we're doing today with our Tuesday Explorer program. So I hope you'll continue to take advantage of these opportunities and more. And now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Lily Liu, who, like me, is also a volunteer community ambassador with our Northern Virginia AARP group. And Lily, I will turn the program and the format over to you and our guests.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you so much. Your example of giving back to our community and your passion for volunteerism really inspired me to sign up and join AARP Northern Virginia as a volunteer. So thank you so much for your beautiful example. It is truly an honor today as we stand on the threshold of the month of love and also Black History Month to have this very special program hosted by AARP Northern Virginia and the team there that really have given us an opportunity to stay engaged even while we're cooped up, and we're able to travel both mentally and spiritually. Today we have a very special program. May I ask our two honored guests to come on the stage? Miho Kinnas, who right now is actually in Japan, so about 14 hours ahead of us on the East Coast, and Ethelbert Miller, a literary icon in the DMV and across the United States. Miho, should I say good morning to you?
Good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. Yes, thank you so much, the AARP Virginia, for inviting us. I'm very excited to be here for your Tuesday Explorer series. Thank you.
It is our honor to have you. And Ethelbert Miller, who I had met about 25 years ago when I attended and he gave a most thoughtful introduction to the local speaker. And thanks to his mentorship, I promise I will continue writing. Hello, Ethelbert.
Hi, Lily. It's always good to see you. I think that what you're doing is very, very important, and I'm happy to be here. And for you to bring me together with Miho, it makes it also very special.
It's a true duo on the cusp of the month of love and how we all love poetry. Miho, since you are so well known, but we would like you to introduce yourself to us in your own words. Who are you?
Okay, my name is Miho Kinnas. I'm a poet and a translator. I was born and raised in Japan, but I live in South Carolina, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina right now. But I also lived Hong Kong and Shanghai for about 18 years. So I've been kind of all over. And my physical connection to the area is through my daughter. She went to school in Richmond, Washington, D.C., and her office is in Maryland, in Silver Spring. So I do have some physical connection to the area. Also, I started writing in English about 20 years ago, creatively speaking. And I was first published maybe 2009. I was going to be a translator, but I started writing on my own. So that's about me.
Oh, I'm so glad you did, because we can benefit from your creativity. Of course, Ethelbert Miller needs no introduction, but what I love to be able to say when I introduce him is he is a literary activist. All yours, Ethelbert.
Yeah, I'm a literary activist, and since Miho was talking about roots, I grew up in the South Bronx. I came to Washington, D.C. in 1968 to attend Howard University. Many people associate me with that institution because I was the director of the African American Resource Center for over 40 years. That gave me an opportunity to be in a position to organize, writers' conferences on the campus, use the connections that I had on campus to extend it into the community. And so back in 1974, I started an Ascension poetry reading series. And when I look back over that series of programs that lasted for many, many years, many writers that are well known today, got their first reading on my series. To give you an example, one person who I think I gave their first reading here in DC was Kevin Young, who's now head of the African American Museum. So you can see how things have really changed in terms of where people have wound up. So it's been a good ride, a good journey.
Ethelbert, because you are now nominated for a Grammy, I'm going to tease you. The audience is asking you to move closer to the microphone so that they can hear your spoken word.
Hear my spoken word. Now you're supposed to say, "Oh, buy my CD" or something like that.
But do tell us, because this is hot off the presses news. This Sunday is the Grammys. What is your nomination all about, please?
Well, the Grammys is, we think of the music industry, but what happened is that they have created a new category, the 65th year, which is going to be one in terms of spoken word and poetry. And I think that's an indication of what's been happening, not only in our country, but actually around the world. Many people have, found poetry as being something they really enjoy. Many people have found their voice because of the political conditions that they're in. But it is a thing that I think the Academy now is recognizing it. I take particular interest in it because being nominated this year is also the 250th year of Phyllis Wheatley publishing her first book of poetry. So there's an interesting, historical continuity that we can see here.
You're always the educator. Every conversation I have with you, I learn something new. Thank you for that. May I now delve into how two of you began writing poems together? Miho, what is your angle on this duo-ness, this two-ness?
Well, we started writing emails back and forth, and our writing turns into poetry often very naturally. So we started reacting to each other's lines. So we began just line by line, or maybe a little haiku. And then it just developed from there. Ethelbert?
Well, I think it's more than that. I think that one, were very helpful on a book that I'm working on called The Little Book of E, which is my book of haiku, which being translated into Hebrew. And you have been were helpful in terms of looking over my haiku, as well as the poet Lenore Moore, who lives in North Carolina, who's considered one of the experts in haiku in the world, actually. And so you and Lenore were very helpful to me. But then also, we were reading books together before we were actually writing together. So I think that, when you talk about the importance of reading and being, let's say, in a book club and sharing a book and talking about literature, I think that lays the foundation for good writing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want to get in on this email chain.
We still read books together. I come across something interesting, and if I think Ethelbert would be interested and we talk about it, we pick a book and read together. And he reads a lot for his radio shows and TV shows, and I learn a lot of books he reads about. And it's been my reading has expanded greatly.
Yeah.
And then I think the reading leads back to some of our work, because if you look at some of the early poems that we collaborated on, there's references to particular books that we were reading.
Yes.
Well, may we have a sample first from Miho of a poem so that we actually get a flavor of your writing. I believe you have one ready for us. And then afterwards, please tell us why you came recently through the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area, besides, of course, seeing your daughter.
Right. Ethelbert, would you like to read our new poem
So we
first
know new poem
before?
because
Yeah.
because we'll do something different on this one in terms of we're actually reading it
Mhm.
together. And this is a very recent poem. Here tangled with broken shells of adornment.
I just want to love you for the pleasure of loving you as I swim naked to the bottom of the ocean. I am looking for a pearl whose luster will tell me how to find you.
Why is the heart a compass turning?
My hair forever coral, twisting and twisting, tangled with broken shells of adornment.
Here filled with fragments, glittering like underwater stars.
The seaweed wonders about my hair as I swim and wonder about you. Thank you.
Wow, let's just let that sit for a moment. Wow. Kindly repeat the title for us again.
That's here tangled with broken shells of adornment.
Wow. Miho, you recently came through. I wish I could have met you in person. Come to see us in this DMV area.
Yes, I planned a trip to see some artworks at the Smithsonian's Freer Gallery of Art. And there, I think the exhibition is still going on through the, I think mid-February. There are some artworks collaborated by two Japanese artists. One is a poet, one is visual artist, and a scholar. So there are some pottery and scrolls in the Japan section of the Freer Gallery. So I was very glad to be able to see it because, believe it or not, I cannot see them in Japan right now. So they're not showing the exhibits right now. So I was very glad to be there. Yes.
And then you were able to gather with Ethelbert. That's wonderful.
Yes.
First meet, two very different backgrounds. How did you first meet? Ethelbert, what was your memory of that first meeting, please?
Oh, the first meeting was probably like this. It was like a Zoom meeting, right? Miho, you recommended me to some people, so you pretty much know our beginnings better than I do, actually.
Actually, I didn't recommend you. I found you on the Zoom interview show, which was organized by South Carolina poets, friend of mine, Al Black and Tim Conroy. They started these interviews because of lockdown. We could not go out and do the readings or meet each other. So they decided to invite different poets and ask us questions and talk about poetry. So that series went on the whole year. And I was watching almost every week, and I saw Ethelbert, and they talked about baseball poems. And I do love. I'm from Japan, and I'm an Ichiro fan as well. So I love baseball. So I was very interested, and he read some poems. And what I did was I have a community pop-up bookshop on weekends on Hilton Head. So I wanted to have his books. So I wrote to him, he sent me some books. And then as he mentioned earlier, we started talking about haiku. So, without COVID and Zoom, we wouldn't have met.
That is a wonderful story. I know for myself, the discovery that haiku was big in the African-American community. Maybe Ethelbert, you could just give us a little history of that because of one very special writer who ended up writing haiku
Right.
toward the end of his
Well,
life.
when people think of haiku in African-American literature, I think they immediately think of Richard Wright. And Richard Wright started writing quite a number of haiku pretty much during the latter part of his years, when he was ill. And so that was a surprise, even though when, you look at Richard Wright, Richard Wright started out writing poetry. We think about Native Son and The Outside in some of his novels, but he wrote poetry. In fact, when you look at Ta-Nehisi Coates' popular book Between the World and Me, it's taken from a poem by Richard Wright, dealing with lynching. The other poets that are associated with haiku, who I got to know very well, is Etheridge Knight, as well as Sonia Sanchez and also Leonard Moore. Those are key people. I also was very fortunate to have correspondence with James Emanuel, who was an African-American writer who I remember when I was in college. I was reading a book he edited called Dark Symphony. And he was one of the African-American writers, like many jazz musicians, who left the country and went to France. And he was writing jazz haiku. And we started corresponding, and I was able to publish some of his jazz haiku in the African-American Review that I was working with at that time. But these individuals, Sonia Sanchez, Etheridge Knight, Richard Wright, James Emanuel, and Leonard Moore are pretty much part of the tradition that emphasizes that African-American writers write in various forms.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Lily, if I may add, actually, I teach a lot of haiku-based workshops, and I have done quite a bit of research of haiku written in English. And the people, just Ethelbert mentioned, the poets she mentioned, plus maybe Sonia Sanchez, I might add, the African-American poets' haiku is just so unique. I mean, it's different from everybody else. I was just so amazed when I found out about them.
Well, as one person wrote in the chat, there have been so many positive things that have come as a result of COVID and the two-dimensional platform of the internet, allowing others and two amazing creative persons like you to meet. I know that Miho, thank you both of you for teaching us about how communities share and what strikes us from each community. Ethelbert, because it was baseball that introduced you to Miho, do you have a baseball poem that you could share from your many?
Right, I'll read a baseball poem, and I'll also dedicate this reading to Jackie Robinson, because today's Jackie Robinson's birthday. Jackie Robinson was born on January 31st, 1919. I found something very interesting, that Jackie Robinson was born in 1919, right? That sounds like my mother was born in 1919, but I never associated like her and Jackie Robinson being the same age, because, that's my mother, So I found it very interesting. I just completed this baseball trilogy. So it's 3 books dealing with poetry. The first book, If God Invented Baseball, captured a lot of me writing about my youth growing up, loving the game, but then also talking about the seasons that we go through in terms of life. And so we deal with aging. And so that first book really deals with that. This last book that I'm reading from is How I Found Love Behind the Catcher's Mask. And this poem is Every Buddhist is a Baseball Player, in 7 parts. 1, the bullpen is quiet when it laughs at the scoreboard and rubs its belly. 2, the rally over, you're the 3rd out, your bat asleep on your shoulder. 3, falling from the sky, the ball, a small moon, falling like an eclipse into a glove. 4, the designated hitter sits in the dugout, practicing sitting meditation. 5, dirt on a jersey, a symbol of devotion to the game. 6, every Buddhist, a baseball player. Each breath, a pitch, a catch, a hit. 7, the road from the minors to the majors is the path of 2 directions. And that's in my book, How I Found Love Behind the Catcher's Mask. And we dedicate that to Jackie Robinson.
Yes, let us let that sit for a minute, because we're really holding a very sacred space here. I'd like to share how Ethelbert has been a part of our communities. There is an Opal Elliott who is writing in the chat, Ethelbert. She wrote, I remember when you sat in at our book club, and it was called The Page Burners in Rosslyn at Busboys and Poets in DC, and discussed your wonderful book, The Fifth Inning. So this is going back a ways, right?
That is.
Which was our read that month. Congratulations on your Grammy nomination. And by the way, our book club will enter its 20th year together next year. I think that's an invite to return.
Right, that is. And the Fifth Inning is actually a book that Busboys and Poets and Andy Shalal published. So it has a busboy connection.
Oh, many are part of this book club, but the main thing is it teaches us how much you are part of the community and have always been, and now stretching across oceans to Miho. Miho, may I ask you a quick question? Because I myself am a translator. So how is it that for someone who is not, the native language was another language, how is it that you wanted to, and what's it like to write in English, another language?
Right. Okay. Yes, I was studying to become an interpreter, and especially I was interested in translating poetry. And one of my teachers said, Miho, you have to become a poet to translate poetry. So I started to seriously writing, and I just never stopped. And it's been about 20 years now. I did not grow up speaking both languages, so it's totally acquired language. So if I try to write the same thing in Japanese and in English, I realize my process is very different. So when you write in a native language, if I write about this topic, all the words and expressions and concepts come in the language. So what I need to do is to reorganize those words. That's how I write in Japanese. However, in English, words don't come right away. It's more pictures, images, and something abstract in colors and shapes. Then I have to turn them into the language. So, the process of writing is very different in my case. Yes. Thank you for the question.
Oh, fascinating. That was beautifully, beautifully explained. And then for Ethelbert, then meeting someone like Miho, has that changed your writing or the way you approach poetry?
Well, I think Miho has probably changed my life more than just my writing. And I say that in terms of one, our writing is completely different. One of the beautiful things about collaboration, is that you pretty much open windows and doors that you didn't even expect. And so in the case of what she's done to my work and my life, it's made me more attentive to description, seeing, if I look at the book that we've worked on together, you can see a lot of references to like fish, water, astronomy, space, which was not necessarily my themes. Also, what I like about her work is that whatever she's doing, she'll pull into her work. And I like that aspect because my work was pretty much a narrative. I begin here and I know where I'm going to conclude. My work was definitely always political, so to give you an example, Miho likes to watch birds and go out and watch birds, and I think of the black guy up in Central Park, watching birds, so you can see, just the whole thing in terms of our lives being different, but that's how you grow. And I think that when you talk about collaboration, the thing that you're really doing on a very fundamental level is that you're building community. And so you're building community one person, one friendship at a time.
That makes so much sense. And I know that we have a lot of literature and poetry lovers with us today. May we drill down to how you actually do it? Even if Miho were down in South Carolina, there is distance. Miho, how do you two actually write together?
It's via email. Sometimes when I wake up, the first line is waiting for me. The Ethelbert wakes up very early and he sends me a line. And I go swimming in the morning and I think about it and I return the line. So that's how they goes. In the beginning, it was very intermittently, but sometimes after a couple of months, and then we started writing several poems sometimes in a day. It was very fast. It was very exciting, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the challenge that we got, what we had to confront, is when we moved into saying, okay, we're doing a book, okay, in which we had to decide what poems that we've written will go into the book, and then we also would start saying, okay, how do we do revision? Okay, and that's a really good thing. I think it's like some of the poems was like first thought, best thought. Okay, you have a line, I respond, just like how you go back and forth because it is email. But now what happens? You have a poem. Okay, now what do you feel is proper? What do you want to take out of it? How do you want to edit? And then coming to an agreement. I think what happens is that we started, I guess, coining the term Twoness because we realized that we had reached a point of telepathy. That it wasn't really that much of a problem in terms of a revision because, for many writers who come through, say, workshops, or many writers who are putting together a manuscript and turning it into a book, it can be a difficult process. I don't want to put this here, why are you taking that out? I mean, Miho's taught workshops. I've taught, for many years up at Bennington, and you start tinkering with somebody's poems, the little fights we break out in the workshops. And that's why it's so important that if you have a workshop, that you turn that into a sacred place where people feel comfortable to share and give feedback and disagree and agree.
I'm so glad you both are educators at heart, because on February the 14th, you two will actually offer a virtual workshop. And we'll put the information in the chat. It's at writers.com. And what I love is someone in the chat has already said what Ethelbert just mentioned about building a community, one friendship at a time, is so true. Tell us a little bit about this February 14th workshop and what you both hope to do and what the students, the people who come to it, will gain. I'll start with Ethelbert first, please.
Well, I think the day that's selected is very symbolic. It's Valentine's Day. So, as opposed to maybe going out and find some flowers or some candy or something like that, you might want to write a poem because at least the poem won't melt and the flower won't die. The poem won't die. That's a joke. Okay. But what I'm saying is that I think it's an opportunity for people to say, okay, I want to share my work with someone. I want to build something with someone. And then, okay, how do I do it? And so if we can, and it's in a small way, provide tips, use our own lives and our own work as examples, I think that we're making a contribution to our community.
We also, in Japanese poetry, there is a tradition of linked poems. Haiku, how it started was from the linking of many poets writing together, and we listen and then we return. So it's very important to understand what somebody else is saying and then decide what to say and then offer this poem to the next poet. So but writing with Ethelbert is a little different because the traditional linked poem is very formalistic. However, what we are doing was more merging, and we became, just one poem. We are not telling who wrote which lines, really. And sometimes we even forget who wrote this line. Is this mine or yours? So we started calling it Twoness.
And we also had a very interesting discussion, and we started taping our discussions, and recording them. One is that Miho was saying, okay, this is very much like improvisation, this and that, going back and forth. Then I said, no, I don't think it's improvisation. I think this is more like call and response, in terms of the using its music as a reference. And so even those concepts, we started talking about that, and Miho started listening to more jazz. But we were looking at the process. But I would go back that even before the process, it is what I would call the first level, which is the intent, the willingness and desire to write a poem with another person. That is what I think is extremely important. And then also, for example, underneath our poems are both our names. You know, I mean, I know people, they don't want to share anything, but I did it, and maybe you helped. You know, I mean, if you go back, look at how many women maybe wrote their husband's poems but didn't get any credit. You know, wrote novels that didn't get any credit. And I think it's very important if we're going to have this Twoness, you know. And I always said, okay, even if it was not alphabetical, I wanted Miho's name to go first.
Oh, that is beautiful. May we sample something from this new book, which you have told me will be coming out this summer? And the title of your, I guess the word is seminar, the webinar, is Twoness, Twoness, which is perfect for Valentine's Day. May we have some samplings from this forthcoming book, please?
Miho, you want to read the title poem?
Okay, yes. So the title of the book is We Eclipse into the Other Side. And the poem I read, this the title poem, has the same title. It's one of our earlier poems. You do not see me. My eyes are overcast. Spring mist is not mistaken. Somewhere there is a mountain of desire somewhere. The map is either honest or mistaken. We are all lost hitchhikers, holding onto the guide to our galaxy. There are oceans of space up ahead. A shaft of light does not tire. The edge of darkness has reached this planet. Our souls eclipse into the other side, breaking into splendor.
You know, I would mention something, just an observation. Miho said this is one of our early poems. And one of the things which Miho did, which I think is extremely important, especially when you're putting together books, we know that this poem was done back in March 3rd, 2022. You know, that we have dates behind the poems of catalog. And I think that might be very helpful to someone who says, okay, what is this Twoness? What is this collaboration? And someone could say, okay, let us look at what happened in terms of the first poems that you were doing. So if you look at the poem that we opened up with in terms of hair tangled with broken shells of adornment, someone might say, okay, what's happening in this poem that would not have happened like, say, a year before? Okay, I do know that with We Eclipse on the Other Side, one of the things I was learning from Miho was her interest in space. Like you were going down to like a NASA launch, I think. You know, so you know what happens is that got into the work, and I think that's very, very important. I think the poem Hair Tangled with Broken Shells of Adornment is probably outgo the fact that you can't swim every day since you're in Japan right now, and so your morning is different. So that longing for water and stuff and the ocean, I think, gave rise to this the poem that we opened the program with.
That's beautiful, because I can sense the generosity of spirit. One of our attendee friends had already said that it's so thoughtful of you, Ethelbert, in listing Miho's name first, that generosity of sharing. Thank you for that observation. Miho, was there a poem, because you and I talked about on food? I was so curious about that one, because with your having been, you know, both in Japan and America, I'm very curious how you wrote that poem, what's in it.
Okay, so on food is a sequence, and it's a haibun. So haibun is the mixture of prose section and a little haiku. And I think I was in MFA program in Hong Kong when I wrote this, and a teacher helped me. Actually, teacher introduced me to this form, and at that time, I lost my father, and not a long time ago. So I do write a lot about family. So I think I'm going to read this poem. It takes maybe a couple of minutes, 2 minutes or so. Okay. On food. One day, I thought my life was too complicated. When my mother-in-law passed away in Perry, Georgia, I was in Tokyo accompanying my father for his surgery. Then apprenticeship, watching mother-in-law bake cornbread without measuring. When my father passed away, I was at my home in Shanghai. I left the hospital a week earlier. My parents loved eating. An old couple orders pork cutlets with new cabbage on the side, getting their dentures ready. Those of us born in Japan after 1955 seems to never be able to understand the voracious appetite of previous generations. Such a demarcation of hunger exists everywhere. Our mothers and fathers worked hard to eat and for us to eat better. The memory of shortage, however, never left them. The elderly beamed at empty store shelves after tsunami, just like when we were young. The last meal I told my father about was udon noodles I had in the cafeteria of the hospital. The 3 cherry trees in the garden were visible from every table. His room this time was on the 4th floor. Lying down, he looked up at the narrow strip of sky. I returned to my father's hospital room. How's Blossom? What did you eat? As I left the room later that day, I overheard him asking the nurse whether he could order udon noodles for dinner. The nurse smiled and said, "It may be difficult for you to slurp," and hooked the oxygen mask over his face. When I was little, a tofu seller came to our neighborhood with a wooden box tied onto the backseat of his bicycle. I was often sent out to buy tofu. Listening for the tofu seller's brass horn on a chilly wind. At dusk, I often think about eating tofu. The assembling of tofu dish is simple. Kombu seaweed for umami, scallion or bonito flakes for color, a bit of yuzu citrus for tartness. The same tofu turns into something fundamentally different if we use wasabi, ginger, or grated radish and hot pepper. Still simple, yet somehow never the same. Thank you.
We have to let that sit for a minute. Food, the love language between generations. And how both of you, I now realize, because we're an AARP community here, have written so beautifully about aging and the intergenerational ties. Let's let that sit for just a minute. It's so beautiful, Miho. Thank you. Everyone is saying in the chat, it's inspiring what you two are giving us this afternoon. And thank you. We can literally taste it and visualize it. Beautiful. Thank you. Ethelbert, I cannot not let you talk about your poems, because as we approach the Love Month, you now are 40 years in on a beautiful marriage, and you have written so beautifully about the love between generations. May we have some poems from you about these themes of love and intergenerational ties, please?
Well, I host a morning weekly radio show every Thursday on WPFW 89.3 FM. And one Valentine's Day, I asked one of my really dear friends, Wendy Rieger, anchor for NBC, who died last year. I asked her to read her favorite love poems. And she came on the air, and she loves poetry, she loves poetry. And we just did this program on the air on Valentine's Day on the radio that I played 1 year later, because it was such a very important one. And, as Pamela comes up, I think of that loss, because when you think about Valentine's Day, we think about, falling in love. But look at even the recent situation in Memphis, love is also about loss. It's when you remember the person that, died, remember the person that was taken from you, whether through illness. Many of us because of the pandemic, have not even been able to grieve properly, not be bedside with someone, not being able to attend the funeral. So love takes on a different type of meaning, and then also when we think about love, we have to break it down. We struggle to reach the level of divine love, which is extremely important. We struggle to sort of deal with the beloved community. So I go back to, and I listen to, Martin Luther King, and everybody talks about King's speeches, but they don't really focus on King's sermons, in which you get the essence of what he's talking about. The essence of, like, his book, Strengths to Love, is about King's sermons. The same way when we talk about Jimmy Baldwin's theme is love. I mean, that underlines his work, is emphasized in his essays. It comes through in his novels. And he says this white-black struggle is a lover's struggle. And so when we read love poems, we read it in a certain context. It's not just about relationships. Sometimes it's love of country, or I think of the poet that we associate with love, and that's Pablo Neruda. You can't come from Chile without being, but then you realize, I love Pablo Neruda. That's why I have to struggle against, dictatorships like Pinochet, because I love my country. And so our responsibility as love extends not just from, loving each other, but extends to the trees and mountains. And this gets back to Miho's work. And I think of the great poem by Ernesto Cardenal called Ecology, where he says this Nicaraguan revolution was not just for people, but it was for the mountains, for the lakes and the trees, and so we have to take our love and expand it to that. And so this is a long introduction to two short poems. And so I'll read these two love poems. Suddenly, I begin a poem with the word suddenly. It's all because you said you lost your voice. This came after I said I missed you. Now I miss you more, as if suddenly you were gone, as if you had never said goodbye. You are every hello I have ever wanted to hold dear, every hello I wanted to kiss hello. Suddenly, this poem ends. Too suddenly, the way love ends suddenly, when you lose your voice and cannot say, I love you. I miss your voice, and now everything I hear reminds me of you. I hear you as if suddenly we were back together, and you and I were not missing each other. Oh, so suddenly, my dear, I thought I might lose you. Come now, hold me close, hold me near, hold me close, and suddenly. And this second love poem is actually a love poem. We're talking about haiku, and I was talking about James Emmanuel and jazz haiku. This is a jazz poem, and there's a number of poets who write jazz poems. One person who I like, David Lehman, we taught together at Bennington. He's a Frank Sinatra guy, and so all of a sudden there's a line from a song or something like that, and I began to sort of borrow David Lehman's approach to writing. In the hush of night, if it was 1963, you would appear in all of your splendor. Maybe I would be walking down the street with Coltrane, and we would stop at the corner and meet McCoy. Instead, you spend your week wondering what the doctors will find this time. Sometimes the music tries to serenade the cancer away. After we talk on the phone, I catch my breath the way Coltrane does on My One and Only Love. Then Johnny Hartman begins to sing, and I want to place my arms around you and be as warm as his voice, trying to find those words of love. oh, the very thought of you.
Wow, Ethelbert. Tell us the title of that poem again,
Let's
please.
call it in the hush of night. And it's a poem that I wrote. You're talking about Miho and how we write. This is where a friend of mine was battling cancer. So this is like a cancer poem, and that whole thing of like wondering what the doctors will find. And so I'm listening to music, and sometimes within a song, there's an opportunity for your mind to just drift off. And so what happens is that the intimacy of this poem is when you have a line like, I'm walking down the street with Coltrane. I'm not listening to Coltrane. I'm walking down the street with Coltrane. And not only that, we hook up with McCoy Tyner, and then it comes back to Jimmy Hart. And then the actual poem lines in the Hush of Night is, oh, the very thought of you. So I'm actually quoting the lyrics from the song that Johnny Hartman's singing. And then if you actually listen to My One and Only Love, you hear where Coltrane comes in, where, you hear them. So if you were teaching this poem, you would have to put on that record, My One and Only Love, and listen to that. And you say, okay, maybe I would be walking down the street with Coltrane, and we would stop at the corner, meet McCoy, and you would see what I'm talking about. And then I'm trying to create that stop right there in terms of my poem it's in the song.
Miho, I was watching your face as Ethelbert because I was just as mesmerized. I can see why on the two-dimensional platform you fell for his poetry, right? Even though you had not. That is the thankfulness that we have for what COVID brought us, that we could make friendships across national borders. Before I ask Ethelbert to read two poems from your forthcoming collection, I'd like to be able to ask you how excited you are that this book of poems is coming out this summer. What does it mean for you to have a book of poems come out that is by two people?
Well, for me, for saying, how do you feel about the Grammys? I think I'm waiting for this book to come out. I'm more excited that, and I say that because the work that I'm being honored for in terms of Grammy is all work. It's nice that it's recorded and it's music and stuff like that, but it's my old work. And so what happens is that, many times, an artist is always concerned about like, what are they doing next? And so when I look at the work that doing with Miho, to me, it opens up another chapter. It comes after, the Grammy work. It comes after my baseball work. I completed my trilogy. So if somebody would say, Ethelbert, you've written 3 books of poetry about baseball, what are you going to do next? Well, I think, the collaboration has pointed me in a new direction and sort of like a new journey. And so I'm deeply grateful for that.
I think, Lily, you just said that I fell for his poetry. I fell for him. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, he's really, really amazing. And there are many things I learned from him, especially jazz music. I'm totally into it. I'm learning it little by little. But not only that, it's a life changer for me too. So the book coming out, hopefully this is just only the first, and we keep working together. I really hope that.
And the fact that you are going to offer on February the 14th, Valentine's Day, a webinar class as 2 educators, that is wonderful to know. Not only are you benefiting from knowing each other, you're going to share to others. So thank you for that. Ethelbert, which 2 poems from this new book would you like to share with?
I'm going to read, we were looking at writing and we were collaborating, and we said, okay, let's, just look at forms. And so we just said, okay, we're going to write an ode. And so I wrote an ode to a basement. Miho wrote a poem, a swimming pool ode, but this is ode to a basement. To some, I seem like hell. I welcome things that come to die. Welcome my darkness. I am the one who welcomes you when you fall. I'm a vase in the back of the shelf in the corner of your dreamer dome. This is the eternity where I think about my awakening in the antique shop warehouse, in an industrial building by the sea. All things come to me. The devil does inventory. Boxes of souls and first editions of books. Clothes that once belonged to the naked. Look down my stairs and see all the broken shells. fragments are the most beautiful things in the world. You know what each piece meant, and others who know how to look weave stories out of them. But now the old garments are left behind as if discarded by someone whose name was Jesus. Look around and see all the things that should be donated. There's nothing left with me that faith can restore. This basement has no exit. I must give away the old clothes, ignore the cries of the believers who pray only in the attic. I know a poet who wrote about stuff under the tattered clothes of disdain for the word stuff. It was unmistakable that he knows your mission because he's a collector of traces. His memory spans a century at least, maybe two. The stuff is a namesake of love. Our time with stuff is short, yet will you postpone the inevitable, allowing us the time to savor what we have. I think, because this is an ARP response, I think many of us are probably dealing with downsizing and what do we do with our stuff? Sometimes our children don't want our stuff, okay? Or what happens, a lot of things get placed down in the basement, and so, I wrote this, together we wrote this poem. And I think there's places where there is a degree of humor in it, I think that that's not just all serious, we were writing these poems together, but, we as you can tell, Miho laughs a lot, and I think that's important that, there's a place in poetry for humor. And one of the people that I learned that from was the great poet Sterling A. Brown, that if you went to a Sterling Brown reading when he was living, he had you laughing. Of course, in between the poem, he told what he called lies. So the lies were just as funny as the poems.
Maybe then we'll skip to Miho to do her ode so that we have them side.
Right,
Swimming
okay.
pool ode, right.
Audience member
So-
said that gave her chills.
I do love swimming, and I do love swimming pool. So ode is a love poem, right, to the swimming pool. And we wrote it the day before we wrote the ode to basement. So after we wrote this, I said Ethelbert was struggling with his basement. So at the time, so yeah, anyway, so this is my love poem to a swimming pool. A swimming pool ode. My secret desire is to be contained in your strictly measured rectangle prism, filled with filtered water. Lotus flowers circling my head as I breathe. I spend the magical hour pre-dawn to sunrise, immersed in your elemental. Each day is a day of baptism. I thank you for your holy water. At times, I break free and stray into the ocean. Yet, you are my safe harbor I always return to. There are days when I wish to see you, but cannot see you. My feet restless, but afraid to take the morning step, longing for the net of bright light reflecting on all 6 surfaces to cover me head to toe, with the illusion of delicate scales. This is how my day begins. Me inside you, forever inside you, four walls of paradise. As you know, there are no 2 bodies of water alike. In my youth, I loved your cold groundwater in the woody park. There are cosmos of oceans to explore, to slip into the deep and dive beyond the wreck, is to face one's beginnings, to fish one's imagination. I always find the perfect puddle when I need it. I trust your buoyancy and be free to become one and the same. I cannot live without you. Sometimes I need more than water. I need your comfort. Please speak Japanese to me. I understand every language you speak, and I remember every time we were together. I learned everything in your arms. Now I swim to the pool's edge. I splash and laugh, and the world turns, and this swimming turns into endless pleasure.
Oh, wow. Let's let that sit for a moment. Whew. I cannot believe our hour has literally flown by, and I know that we would love to hear more poems, but I do want to honor one attendee who has seen this opportunity to learn from a literary activist his whole life. Ethelbert, may I just briefly ask you to give us your thoughts, because this is key. Just real quick about the current controversies around banned books, And there's actually a book that this person identified called American Dirt, who gets to say who can write. If you could briefly just give us your wisdoms, and then we'll close out the event, because your literary activism has inspired so many of us.
Well, I think that, when we think about issues of censorship, we have to look at the country that we live in. We are a country with a constitution, with a Bill of Rights. Okay, we see, for example, that the freedom to express ourselves on page is not something all writers in every country has the right to or has access to. I think the worst thing that we've seen is some of the things that is coming out of Florida, especially, in terms of sort of putting tying the hands of teachers and librarians, okay? Being concerned about how our children are being educated. It seems as if we have not adapted to social media. I mean, our children know what's going on in terms of that. To me, to say ban a book by Toni Morrison or Richard Wright, for example, after having to sit through networks showing what happened in Mississippi to a young Black man, I say, okay, no one's censoring that. We see these images over and over again. And so now we come back to literature, and we have to realize that the literature is more important not to censor, because it enables you to read a passage and contemplate, to stop and think. To the books, or the importance of a library or a bookstore is to become as important and as sacred as a church or synagogue or a mosque. This is where you come together and discuss ideas. I don't want to be censored where ideas that I disagree with, I don't even want to hear. Okay. And so what happens is that if you're in a society censoring, that's a censoring, you have to look at the people who are being attacked, and you realize you have to protect their rights, even if you don't look like them. So if you are not sensitive to the rights of trans people, I mean, if someone who's trans, that you cannot say, well, male, female. No, that ability to decide who they want to be, what sex they want to be, there's something very fundamental that needs to be protected by the Constitution. And I would say this: we talk about the founding fathers of Virginia. There were 2 constitutions, okay? The founding fathers, they're not all perfect white men, okay, like Jesus, or if you think Jesus is white. But what happens is that you realize that there are 2 constitutions. It's the founding fathers, it's the first constitution, and there's the second constitution that occurs after the Civil War during Reconstruction. So if you talk about people who have disabilities or people who are gay, what protects them? It's the second constitution, with the 14th, 15th, 16th Amendment, that we realize that this country was not perfect. The Constitution has to be elastic, this and embracing. You don't want to be censoring books. That goes against the fundamental teaching. If you go back to Reconstruction, right after the Civil War, the emancipated slave walked miles to a classroom to learn. Okay, and you're going to tell me years later we want to take that away? We want to say, okay, you walk miles and miles, but you can't read the Toni Morrison that's on the second shelf. I mean, and that's I say, if you look at the Langston Hughes and others, they always battle against censorship. Langston was censored because he got up in a church. Maybe I might have been in South Carolina. He got up in a church and he was going to read his blues poems. And the minister put a little note, said, "Oh, not in my pulpit." And Langston said that was the first time he found out a form of censorship, okay, that they did not want to hear this. But what happened? Years later, we honor Langston Hughes because he is a blues poet, okay? But you can see there were people within the community at that time that didn't want to hear it, and there's people in the community today that probably wouldn't want to hear it. And so the writers, Miho and myself, and you really, the importance of translation is making sure that there is a common language and bond that is filled with freedom, that people can reach out and build these relationships, that you don't want to be sent. You want to make sure that like the Biden's infrastructure bill, build up these relationships between writers and language and translations and stuff, and make sure things are not censored. Okay, make sure that we just don't emphasize one book, like one book has all the answers. I'm sorry if you think the Bible and Quran thinks that way. Okay, there's many books out there and you can learn from any. The beautiful thing is when you go into a bookstore and you go to a section of the bookstore that you've never been in, go to the gardening books. I remember I had problems with some of my friends. They go in a bookstore with the black books. Well, why don't you read something by Dickens? You know what I'm saying? And I say this in a joking way because sometimes the first level of censorship is we censor ourselves.
Exactly. Thank you, Ethelbert, because the reason I wanted to invite you both to a Tuesday Explorers event is to show that somebody like you in your early 70s is still challenging yourself to write, is still being so creative. Today's event is truly a gift from both of you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Care as you travel between the different countries. I'll let you say a few words of farewell, and Ethelbert. And of course, we know that fortunately this is going to be shared as a recording in the follow-up email, so we can go back and enjoy everything again. Please go ahead, Miho.
Well, thank you so much. I woke up 3 a.m. this morning. It was totally worth it. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody had a good time too. Thank you.
Ethelbert, a few last words of farewell. Thank you.
Well, I think that it's, we're talking about love. We're talking about, tomorrow's Black History Month. I mean, every time you get up, you should really try, okay, how am I making the world a better place? How am I bringing people together? How am I, if I can't hear, how do I learn how to listen? If I can't talk, how do I learn how to see? There's a whole thing that we have to struggle with in terms of making sure that all our emotions, all our feelings, all our senses are always open to new experimentation, new collaborations, and that's what love is about. It's dealing with what is sometimes mysterious and unknown.
Thank you. Well, Trudy, you and I have truly had a beloved community today to end our Tuesday Explorers for January 2023. Thank you both so much to our honored guests. Thank you, AARP Virginia. And thank you, Trudy.
Very good. Lily, thank you for inviting Milo and Ethelbert to join us today. And Milo and Ethelbert, thank you for accepting that invitation. No one dropped off. We usually at about the 30-minute mark, we tend to lose some folks. We didn't lose anybody today, and I am not surprised. So on behalf of AARP Virginia, I want to thank you all for joining us today, express our gratitude to Miho and Ethelbert for joining us for Tuesday Explorer. We would love to get your feedback on our program. In the chat box, you'll see a link to a survey. Please take a moment to click on that link and to share your feedback with us. We will also include that link in the follow-up email. That follow-up email will also have a link to the recording. If you enjoyed today's program, we invite you to join us for many of our other programs. You can see a full calendar of our events at www.aarp.org/virtual-VA. I did put a plug in the chat box as Ethelbert was talking about downsizing and decluttering. We have a class on that next week. So you can register for that class at aarp.org/virtual-VA. So until next Tuesday, take time, take good care of yourself, take care of those that you love. Miho, Ethelbert, thank you so much. This was very enjoyable. Lily, thank you for bringing them to us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone have a great day. Okay.
Bye.
Lily, did you see that you need to end the program?
Yes, I do.